Hi, Rochelle.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you. Great.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to do a quick introduction to Rochelle so that everybody knows. Dr. Rochelle Steven is Species Conservation Coordinator at WWF-Australia and is joining us from Perth today. Is that right, Rochelle? You're in Perth?
Yes, that's right. So it's 12 p.m. for me.
Yes. She's also a researcher with the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, where she's been involved with the project on citizen science for threatened species conservation and for building community support. Her professional experience includes themes on bird habitat conservation and management, which engages the general public in nature appreciation and sharing her passion for using native plants to create ecologically sustainable gardens. Her diverse research experience includes ecological and social research in diverse settings such as the Australian alpine zones, Australia's tropical north, southeast Queensland, the remote highlands of Fiji, as well as in the United Kingdom. With that, Rochelle, I would like to hand over to you. We're very excited about your talk today.
Thanks very much. Just bear with me for a moment while I get my screen sharing all sorted, and what I might do is turn off my second screen because it may cause me problems when I start to share. And what I'm going to do, actually, I found a clip that I'm going to show which will help to sort of explain one of the projects that I'm going to talk about now. When you see the clip, it is me talking in this clip, but I lost a lot of weight a few years ago, so it's a bit cringeworthy, guys, so please, yeah, curb your shock. But it's still a really useful clip. It shows me demonstrating a product or a tool that I helped to co-develop, which I will speak a little more about. And I just think that the presentation in this particular clip tells the story and shows the utility of this product really well. So I'm just going to minimize my Teams. Actually, I think I can just go share. I'm used to doing this on Zoom, of course. So it's a little bit different. If I go RMIT, okay, can you see this so far?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. First of all, I always do start my talks that I do with a acknowledgement of the traditional custodians where my work takes place and where I live and recreate, and I acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging in those lands, which are far encompassing, but I live in Perth and that's Wajak Noongar country, so my acknowledgements to those peoples. So I work in threatened species conservation with WWF-Australia at the moment, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on me because it's a bit of a journey that got me here. Have I still got everybody? There we go. Can everybody still hear and see the screen, my presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so I got here in this particular role after having a really interesting career path that got me to this point. I worked for these two companies for quite some time. So I worked in sales and retail for a number of years, and at the time, it was challenging and it gave me the opportunity to develop some really important skills. And when I then went into science, at first I kind of thought, oh no, and I know that a lot of you are early in your degrees, and I think that this is important that you hear this from someone who's down the track. I first got into uni and I went, wow, you know, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And I felt like Ducky in the Land Before Time. I'd found my own kind. But then coupled with that, when I first started at uni, I thought, oh gosh, I'm loving this environmental science space so much. I've wasted all of those other years working in retail. Now, fast forward a few years into my scientific career development, and I realized that actually the skills that I had learnt working in sales and retail were super important for me going into science and in conservation, because so much of what we need to do is communicate and to share our passion, to share our love for what we're doing, of all of the things that you can study in university, to study conservation and then hope to share that with as many people and shift points of view as possible. The experience that I had gained working in sales and retail, really, it became really clear that that was going to be very, very important, especially when not all scientists are very much into people. Some of them really just would like to be in the bush and not deal with people at all. And that's fine. There is definitely a role for those scientists. However, I see my biggest contribution is in this space of communicating, sharing, still essentially selling a product. And the product now for me is environmental conservation. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about that. And one of the ways that I do that is I do definitely take any opportunity to speak, whether it be face-to-face is always good. I love having an audience to actually give me a bit of feedback. But in this new world we live in, so it's online. So the moral, I guess, of this first slide is that if there are any mature age students or students in the group that are working in a part-time job that may or may not have anything to do with what you're studying, do your best, develop every skill that you can, because it is all transferable, and you just never know when you'll need to whip out that artillery later down the track. So once I kind of realized, oh look, I don't really think I can sell makeup and jewelry much longer. I was 26, and I decided that I wanted to actually work in something in the environmental field. I'd always been a bit of a greenie deep down, and I decided I needed to do that in the professional context as well. So I studied a Bachelor of Science in Ecology and Conservation Biology at Griffith University on the Gold Coast. So I'm in Perth. I came here in 2018, and I did my studies at Griffith Uni on the Gold Coast. Because I went into uni quite late, having worked full time, it didn't seem like much of a big deal to me to stay on and do a PhD after my 4-year degree. And so I stuck around and decided to do a PhD, and that PhD was on bird watching tourism and conservation. So looking at the relationship between bird watching, the bird watchers or birders themselves, and the birds that they watch, what they know about their conservation, if anything, and what sorts of birds they're chasing when they design their travel experiences, because there was a whole world of tourism based on bird watching. So I got to travel to the best birding sites in Australia and to the UK and interview lots of mad bird watchers, and I can say that because I am one. I am a mad birder, and I am also a mad plant nerd. So I'm holding a seedling there for a replanting event that I was doing on a winery in the southwest here, and I really do love living here in the southwest when it comes to plants, because it is a biodiversity hotspot because of the flora here. I do love diving as well, but what brought me over here was this role that I had with UQ, with the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, as mentioned before, and it was looking at getting community involved in the conservation of the critically endangered western ringtail possum. Once that work wrapped up, I was very fortunate, right just at the beginning of COVID really going pear-shaped, to secure a role with WWF-Australia as Species Conservation Project Coordinator for here in Western Australia. So I oversee a few projects among the huge body of work that we do, and my work sits pretty squarely in this box here around saved threatened species. But as you can see, we have quite a diverse body theme of pillars that we work to and priorities around obviously climate change and sustainability around food and oceans. And also all of that through the lens of working with First Peoples around the world, and ensuring that we're conserving nature with equity for all people. So for the work that we have in WA at the moment, one of the key species we're working on is this cutie here with the joey in the pouch, and that is the black-footed rock wallaby. And we also do work on that species in the southwest. So we have some work that my manager is overseeing up in the Kimberley, and then down here in the southwest as well, we have a project in the wheat belt with the black-flanked. So black-footed and black-flanked, they're two different subspecies of rock wallaby, and so they do have slightly different conservation statuses, but the species that I guess my work down here around Perth and the wheat belt's mostly focused on is this black-flanked rock wallaby, which is endangered both nationally and at the state level. We also have a few projects on some smaller critters again. We have a PhD student at UWA doing some work on numbats, which is the top right image there. We also run and have run for a few years now a project looking at the recovery of quokkas on the mainland. So a lot of people don't realise, but quokkas are famous for being the most selfie photographed marsupial in the country, but predominantly over on Rottnest Island just off of Perth. However, there is a pretty, there was a pretty substantial population of them on the mainland south of Perth, a few hours south. However, that area was hit by a catastrophic bushfire in 2015. So WWF have funded some monitoring to look at how the species is recovering after those fires down south, and what factors are driving that recovery or inhibiting it, as it were. And then finally, since 2013, we have co-coordinated a citizen science event each year called the Spring Quenda Count with the state government here in the Greater Perth area. And so this little bandicoot, the bottom left there, is called here a Quenda, and that's its local Noongar name. And the species is the last in this particular group of animals that we know as bandicoots that still persists in the urban landscape. And so this citizen science project is monitoring that to see how it's going, and whether we're actually seeing the species declining over time or moving throughout the landscape in response to how we're changing the landscape. So that's what WWF is doing and what the projects that I'm involved in. Something that I thought would be cool to speak to you about is another project that I was involved with back in southeast Queensland, and this work was funded by the Queensland government, and it was a collaborative effort between Griffith University, Natura Pacific, who are a social enterprise consulting organisation, and I worked for them at the time, and the Queensland government funded this work. And it was to develop a smart device app to guide people on how to use native plants that were appropriate for their gardens. And the reasons for this were, to give you some broader context, is that we know we're in an environmental crisis. We see the media around climate change and Extinction Rebellion and the 6th mass extinction. And the reality is, which is really sad, is that the protected area network, so what we know as nature reserves or national parks, quite simply will not be enough to conserve what is left. And it makes complete sense when you think about it. We have a planet of countries who think that 10% of their land set aside in protected areas is enough for all other species on this planet to live, persist, reproduce, do what it does. And it is not enough. Of course it's not enough. 10% is not enough when one species has the other 90%. So that it stands to reason then that private land must play a role, right? Okay, so if the other 90% of land is there and it is not set aside for conservation, then we are going to see continued decline. So if we don't want to see those continued declines, private land has to play a role. And to be fair, there are parts of the world where that is happening really well. Southern Africa, South America, you see heaps of private landholders that dedicate huge tracts of land as reserve for conservation. But you know what? It comes down to everybody. Every individual has a role to play in this. And so what Grow Native was about was targeting the urban gardens in southeast Queensland, which has undergone massive urban sprawl in the last 15, 20 years, rapidly as well. So we've seen massive land use change, hence why you have a lot of media around the koalas in southeast Queensland now and northeast New South Wales. And that they are just a flagship for a whole suite of other species that are unfortunately really struggling to persist when we have urban development happening so rapidly and a lot of really important habitat being replaced by very simple gardens. And that lack the ecological integrity to support really any biodiversity. So that's what Grow Native was sort of designed to help address. Now, if I go to, I had it on here a second ago, so bear with me for a moment because I have a clip that I want to show you. I did have it open and then I stupidly closed it down. That's okay. I can send a link. I'm so sorry. I thought I had it sitting there and I stupidly closed the window down when I was trying to do my share screen. I'll come back to it. But basically what it is that we gave people and users of the app a few different ways to use it. So we got southeast Queensland. We broke it down into its postcodes and the suburbs that sit within those postcodes. Then we got the vegetation mapping that's been done for Queensland, and it's been done at a pretty fine scale. So what vegetation is supposed to be growing there, okay, at any given postcode level or suburb level? What is the native plants that were there before the area was urbanized? So we overlaid those two things in a GIS, and that meant that we could create a postcode level list of species that are native to that postcode. All right, so it's pretty simple. It took a bit of crunching in the GIS because there's a lot of postcodes and suburbs and a lot of layers around those vegetation mapping. But it had not been done before to this kind of scale. And we have lots of tools out there that help to guide landscape design using native plants, but they're all pretty generic and you don't really tap into the true biodiversity, the true diversity of species that should be found in any given postcode or suburb. So then what I had the fun job of doing was taking that list of species and cross-checking it against what was actually in cultivation in nurseries. What could people actually go to a nursery and buy? So I flagged the species by what was in cultivation. We got rid of the rest, so to speak. So whatever was left, because what you find is that a lot of the native nurseries that are around that create that tube stock that we use in landscaping or revegetation projects, a lot of those species don't turn up in normal commercial nurseries. So we were happy to include everything in cultivation, not just what is pushed to you front and center at Bunnings as a native plant. Okay, so straight away we're broadening the palette of planting choices that any urban gardener could have with this information. Now, to make it a bit more user-friendly and to give people the ability to still have a certain element of design to their gardens, we flagged each species based on the type of garden or garden style that that species would fit in with. So we hear about tropical gardens, cottage gardens, Tuscan style gardens, all of these different kinds of garden styles that people might like to create, and what species would be native to that postcode in cultivation that would help them achieve that garden design. So you could just go restore biodiversity full stop and it will tell you all of the species, and it could just be an absolute hodgepodge. Or you can really tailor it based on your own aesthetic desires. So it was really, really successful. It was a great project to be involved with. It has the potential to be scaled way beyond Southeast Queensland, providing that vegetation mapping is there to begin with. So it depends at what scale your vegetation is mapped on the sort of your state herbarium database. But yeah, it was an awesome collaboration to be involved with, and I spent months looking at Excel spreadsheets, pulling all of that information together. But then when the app came out, and it looks amazing and the images are incredible. So do have a look if you find the time, and I'm happy to find that clip and send it through to the organisers of this, and they can share that with you later on. So beyond something like thinking about urban gardens, there's also the potential to do even more. So you can get involved in citizen science, and I'll talk a little bit about that because that's something that's quite close to my heart in these last few minutes. But something that I think is also really important when you're thinking about anything to do with the environment and the urban landscape is that planning policies drive urban development, okay? And they're going to drive how we develop the urban landscape. And so wherever possible, we should be looking to integrate solid ecological values into our urban design planning policies. Then there really does need to be essentially some kind of mandatory, if I dare use that word, rule around you have to have a certain percentage of at least Australian native plants in your garden. There has to be a certain percentage of land cover that is green vegetation, whether it be grass, which I think is hugely wasteful because it uses water and really doesn't do much else. But, plants, shrubs, herbs, trees, why don't we have a minimum percentage as part of these planning policies? Because it is those policies that will dictate to the developers how they get to adulterate the land that they're developing, basically. Because the reality is, if we have those kinds of principles integrated at that point in the process, you're always going to get better outcomes for other species and by default for people as well. All right, so you really need to engage with the literature that is out there about the health and well-being benefits of nature in the urban landscape, street trees, the value of street trees, the value of green space, all of these things that you are in a university, you have access to this literature, you have people in RMIT working on this stuff. So Sarah Beckersey, Georgia Garrard, Lewis Marta are all in the environmental department there. They're all over this stuff, particularly in that Greater Melbourne seen. So if you're thinking about projects, if you're thinking about integrating any of this into the work that you're doing in your undergrad, and I would strongly recommend you do that, then please get in touch with them. Form those networks. It can only be of benefit to you for your own career. So citizen science is something that's a little bit closer to my heart, and I worked with Lewis Mata from RMIT on one of these projects, the Call Urban Wildlife app you see there for frogs and mammals. But for other vertebrates, which are arguably the easiest to get involved in when you're talking about biodiversity in the urban environment, monitoring it, keeping an eye on how it's going, living with us. What sorts of birds do we see increasing in number in the urban environment? What sorts of birds do we see declining? Well, BirdLife Australia, eBird, iNaturalist, they all have projects that are designed for people to get involved in, to keep an eye on birds, not just in the urban landscape, but that's where the most eyes are, right? So that's where we should be harnessing that effort and that body of people that without the eyes on the ground, there's so much we won't know about the decisions we're making in how we design our cities, our peri-urban areas, and what effect that has on biodiversity. So that goes for frogs and mammals as well. The tool that I had a bit more involvement in is the possum and glider module for the Call Urban Wildlife app. So that app is free to download on the App Store and Google Play, and I can speak for my module quite strongly. The possum and glider module is about understanding how possums and gliders use the urban landscape, not just which species is where, but are they using the fence? Are they using the roof line? Are they using power lines? Are they inside your roof? And are they eating a garden plant? What type of garden plant are they eating? And all of this other information that really people in their backyards can tell us so much about how these animals are persisting. And they don't even realize that they can be such a huge source of really important information for us researchers. So there's just a few tools that are available to the community, to you when you're out there and you've done a whole heap of amazing landscape design, and that people have shown any kind of interest in attracting wildlife to their garden, giving nature a home. This is that step further. Plant the plants and then tell us what you see come to the plants. It all can build on create such a beautiful holistic system of information sharing, benefits for people, benefits for nature. So I think that's about all I was going to try and squeeze in. That's about 10 years of my life squeezed into 30 minutes. So please do get in touch, keep in touch if you want, download the Call Urban Wildlife app. I'm sure that my colleagues in RMIT and Uni Melbourne would love to have more Melbourne people using Call Urban Wildlife app. But feel free to reach out. I'm pretty stalkable and easy to get in touch with if you need any ideas about this stuff and how we can think laterally in incorporating the environment in our day-to-day life. It's definitely something that I am uber passionate about. So I will stop sharing my screen now, I think. That's it.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. That was amazing. Really enjoyed it. And what really resonated was your journey, because when you started talking about what you were doing previously and then, how you switched over to wildlife, I mean, it just makes sense because it's possible to dream big and to be able to do big, right? I mean,
absolutely.
All these things are something that are away from, the reach of the common man, let's say. But but each one of us can make a contribution. And I think this is where I was very curious about your citizen science project. And we did have a talk with Dr. Sarah Bakesy also a couple of weeks back, and it was really nice to see how what you talked about and what she talked about kind of works in parallel. And also, just before you started with your talk, we had some presentations going on by the students, and one of the students, Luca, he was talking about a program which is called Gardens for Wildlife, and they have a similar sort of program to the Grow Native app that you were talking about.
Awesome.
So I just wanted to ask you, how long has this app? I mean, how long did you take for this app to kind of get from the conceptual stage to actually getting built, and who are the sort of people who were involved in it, and a little more about that, please.
Okay, sure. So well, what was awesome, so we, as I said, we secured the funding from the Queensland government, and it was it was an advanced Queensland grant. So the whole point of it was that, yes, it could have a university involved, which it did. It had Griffith University involved, but it was about creating relationships between industry and universities or knowledge-based institutions. And from the time they secured the grant to it actually getting launched, it was about a year. So it wasn't a massive amount of time. I was working 3 days a week, building the app for about 9 months to build all the content, go out, get all the photographs. So we wanted to have really nice images of the plants to sort of sell them to the users of the app. We didn't want dodgy, grainy. So we were lucky that we had one of the most amazing botany photographers. He gave us so many images. It was incredible. And yeah, so by the time we got all of that put into place, the information in the spreadsheet, and then we had the Griffith University tech team build the app for us. So different to when I did the Call Urban Wildlife app for the possums and gliders, where we actually had another app building or entity, product software developer or app developer build it. There are two different kinds of apps though. So the Grow Native app, once you've downloaded it, all of the information is on your device. It doesn't need to speak to the internet at all. Whereas the Call Urban Wildlife app, so the possums and gliders module, when you open your phone and you look at it, it will only show you the possums and gliders that you could be seeing based on where you're standing. It knocks out all of the other ones. So if I'm here in Perth, I'm not going to see the possum that only occurs in North Queensland as an option on my app. But if I go to North Queensland, then I won't see the ones in WA. So it is more of a active web-based app versus Grow Native, which is static. All the content is on your phone ready to go. So that means that the app developer themselves have a different technical process when building that app. So whether the Griffith Uni tech guys could have done something like the Call Urban Wildlife app, Lewis at RMIT, he thought probably we could have had a master's student from uni build it for us. However, it was already underway with all the commercial agreements and all the rest of it by the time I came along. So building these kinds of things, I think, aren't that hard if you speak that language, if you speak all of that coding language that goes into the back end of it all. I don't at all. So I just gave them the information and went in terms of text and numbers and maps and images, and then they turn it into the app that you see on the device. So, and yeah, about a year, I think a year.
Thanks, Rochelle. It also gives us an idea of how we as designers can, be involved from the beginning right till the end of the project, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to open the floor now for questions, comments, feedback.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I got a question. It's about you working with WWF.
Yeah.
Since the start of that, have you done in just off the top of your head, how many projects have you been a part of, and are there any in Melbourne that we would be able to see?
Yeah, okay, absolutely. So we just ran a massive online, it was called a Regeneration Challenge. And so basically in the wake of the Bush 2019-2020 fires, we have secured some amazing support from our donors and our supporters. And so it's really sad that such a huge catastrophe had to occur to stimulate giving on the kind of level that we have seen. And now we have quite a nice pot of money, so to speak, to use really, really wisely, and really identify the need and the impact that we will see from investing in interventions or recovery projects post fires. So I was involved with this innovation challenge, Innovate to Regenerate challenge, where we sought people to put tenders in on recovery projects post bushfire, and I was one of the people involved in reviewing the projects to make sure that they were rigorous, well designed, that the people had consulted adequately across the stakeholder landscape. You know, have you spoken to this person because they're already doing something like that, and it would be good if you work together, all of those kinds of things, and also ensuring that the ecology stacked up. So I've reviewed 35 projects for that for that sort of drive, and that was pretty full on. Not all of them have been funded in this year's round, but yeah, there's definitely work in Victoria, Greater Melbourne, Victoria. Greater Gliders is a big one that I know one of my colleagues is running some pretty cool work on Greater Gliders up in the is it Dandenong Ranges, I think, potentially. And then there is, as I say, the work around citizen science. There's the projects that I've mentioned already, but WWF doesn't tend to do too much in that space. So the work that we predominantly do is working with government, other smaller NGOs and research groups, and we sort of act as the body between the public who want to see work and intervention in this space and the people that actually go out and do it. So we give them the money basically to go and do what we need to have happen to address these biodiversity issues and save threatened species, basically. So if you're interested in anything like that, the website, the WWF-Australia website, has where we're working and with who. So I'd definitely urge you to jump on and have a look and see. I'm pretty sure it is by state. You can look at where we're doing stuff in Victoria and who the key partners are that we're working with, who are the predominant implementation personnel.
That sounds very interesting and a lot of work to be done. Yeah, it's very nice to hear, especially with the fires from last year. It's nice to hear that there's a lot of donations and stuff going into that recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah, amazing. Even during COVID, giving sentiment stayed really, really high. It was so heartening to see. So yeah, it is great.
It's very interesting to me, especially around the bushfires, because my dad is an emergency doctor and he had to actually go help during the bushfires, and I got to see just many photos of, you know, not only the damage but during the bushfires and how serious it really was. So it's good to hear that, you know, people out there are really stepping forward to help.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. So we're just trying to make sure everybody's playing together and we use these resources really efficiently and to get the best benefit for our wildlife. Thanks for your question.
I just, I didn't quite catch, you mentioned was it the Grow Nation app, and what was the other platform you mentioned?
So, what I can do is so there's Grow Native. So I'm just seeing is there a chat? There's no chat box on Teams, is there, that I can I type it in for you somewhere?
Yeah, up the top there should be a speech bubble.
A speech bubble. Maybe not. That's okay. So Grow Native, it's GRONATIVE. So no W in the Grow. That's the only difference, and all one word. So that's the one for Southeast Queensland that uses the native plants per postcode for people to design the garden of their choice using local native plants. The other one is the CAUL Urban Wildlife app. So it's CAUL. Now, it's called CAUL Urban Wildlife app because it was a collaboration between the Threatened Species Recovery Hub, who I was working for, and the CAUL Hub, which is the Clean Air Urban Landscapes Hub. So both the Threatened Species Recovery Hub and Clean Air Urban Landscapes Hub were funded through the Australian Government's National Environmental Science Program, the NESP. Now, that's all wrapping up in July this year, so we all worked on our projects, we delivered our product or our milestones, and then that stuff's all wrapping up, and there's going to be new hubs coming out later this year, I think. But yeah, Clean Air Urban Landscapes Hub, and so when you go into the apps, the one you're looking for is CAUL, CAUL Urban Wildlife. I'm just going to see if it comes up, how it comes up for you. But yeah, so they're the two that I've spoken about that you can probably the CAUL, if you're wanting to get involved yourselves as individuals in the Greater Perth area, the CAUL Urban Wildlife app is going to be the best one. And Lewis, he actually does his module that he has in there for beneficial pollinators. He's got a project, well, he had a project, I'm not sure if he's still doing actual visit outings with him present, but looking at the pollinators, doing pollinator surveys in Westgate. So you might be familiar with that. That's a park not far from Melbourne. So yeah, that's the CAUL. Oh, it's not a very good image because of the screen brightening, but yeah, it comes up with a green frog on the App Store when you look it up, the little icon. That's terrible. It's a little green frog in a pond, basically. So CAUL Urban Wildlife. That's what you're looking for.
Thank you.
No worries.
Any more questions? No. Okay. Rochelle, I do have another question actually. This is more in regards to how WWF would work. For example, WWF-Australia would be one organization, and then we would have it all over the world. So do you have like any partner programs with other intercontinental or maybe whatever governmental other WWFs, I mean, so that if you're doing one project, you would be able to sort of learn from the outcomes, and considering most of these projects would be spread over a few years at least, if not a few decades. So I suppose it would be quite interesting to also learn from the other programs and the outcomes of those other programs in other countries, let's say. So does it work like that at all, or is it a completely independent sort of a body?
Yeah, so it is interesting. We are essentially a franchise of WWF International. So we do operate fairly independently of international. However, we at WWF Australia do support a lot of work with our WWF partners in the region. So we support stuff in the Pacific Islands. We do quite a bit with the Pacific group. We do quite a bit with WWF Indonesia, in particular in Borneo, on orangutans and tigers. And so, yeah, I was asked to help review a project for some work we're planning on funding in Borneo, in Kalimantan. So we do work together, but mostly with us supporting their work, which makes sense, because there's a heck of a lot of Australian WWF supporters that give their money to WWF Australia, but really they're giving their money because they want to support tigers or they want to support orangutans. I mean, which kind of breaks my heart in a way, because we have so many threatened animals here in Australia. But anyway, there is quite a strong sentiment to work in those places, for us to be working in those places as well among our supporters. And also then you have other taxa or animal groups like marine turtles, where they are pan-tropical. So we support work in Solomons, in Fiji, in other islands throughout the Pacific, because we know that some of the turtles that we have born here on our beaches on the East Coast actually move all throughout the Pacific. So we want to be working on turtle conservation across the whole species range, which in some cases can be global, right? So that's also why it makes sense to be working with some of these other partner organizations. Other big NGOs, we work with one called Conservation International. So I've been involved in a project with them doing bringing a tool called Wildlife Insights to Australia. So Wildlife Insights is basically, it's an AI program that we want to use to process camera images of wildlife, so that people don't have to sit in front of a computer for hours on end identifying between one wallaby and another wallaby. This AI will be able to process these thousands of images and tell us what the images are, so that we can use that manpower potentially out in the field planting more trees or something like that. So yeah, that's with Conservation International, WWF US. So yeah, we definitely collaborate with other big organizations and other arms of WWF.
Thank you. Any more questions? All of you did so many case studies based on WWF Australia, the website. I'm sure all of you, I mean, feel free to ask. You don't have to feel shy at all. Okay. All right. In that case, I think we'll close the session. Rochelle, I hope you wouldn't mind if the students reach out to you with further questions or queries, and I would be, you mentioned the video clip. If you could share that privately, I'll write to you, and then maybe you could share it privately, and then I could, share it with the student. That'll be great.
Of course, yeah. No worries at all. And yeah, anybody needs me to send them any information on any of this stuff, then please do reach out. I'm happy to share whatever you might be interested in. I can give you more breadcrumbs to follow.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and for agreeing to speak to us today. It was a brilliant session. Thank you so much again, Rochelle.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your studies.
Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.